of course, we're talking about the big deal that's going on with Trevor Milton and his charges of 3 counts of fraud from federal prosecutors. We talked to our executive publisher, Kevin Hill, about that coming a little bit earlier in the show. Now I've got another firsthand perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. With Mr. Alan Adler. Welcome to the show, Alan. How are you this morning?
Good morning, Michael. Good morning, Kaylee. Nice to see you guys. Bad day for Trevor Milton.
That's what we were talking about.
It's going to be an expensive day eventually here, right?
Well, honestly, at this point, I think you have to wonder if he's convicted. I mean, there could potentially be jail time involved. This is probably the worst outcome you could have expected from this. I've been told over time to, watch the hydrogen space, that maybe the thing that the feds were interested in was making some claims around hydrogen that, may not have been 100% accurate. But this is much worse than that. It's almost like the feds guys took the Hindenburg report from last September and basically put it into legalese and charged Milton almost straight down the line with it.
Alan, and of course, this comes after, we had that Hindenburg report that dropped last September, and then the fall was kind of flooded with this really bad news. This was after a good summer for Milton as he hit that $1 billion valuation after Nikola went public. You've kind of been watching this since the start, since they made the promises of their electric trucks, since they made the promises of the Badger and then pulled that back. You've actually gone out and visited their facilities as well. What can you offer from this firsthand perspective of what's kind of going on and what this could mean for the company as a whole?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, Nikola's doing everything it can this morning, Kaylee, to distance itself from Trevor Milton, saying in a statement that he hasn't had anything to do with the company since last September when he resigned. We know he didn't really resign, quite honestly. He was pushed out. Steve Gursky, who was the head of the special purpose acquisition company that brought Nikola public, took over as chairman, reworked the entire board of directors, set up real metrics for the company. They've now moved into their new plant out in the Arizona desert. They will begin building electric trucks, battery electric trucks, in the fourth quarter, as many as they can. They've had to scale that back in part because of the same supply chain issues that are affecting everybody. But they are trying their best to distance themselves from Milton today, and have for quite some time. They were smart to get out with a statement right away because, as far as I can tell from a quick read of the indictment, there is nothing that touches the company here. It is all Trevor Milton.
Yeah. So, Alan, Kaylee asked a very good question with Kevin Hill earlier, and I'd love to hear your take on it. Does this stick with Nikola, and how do they overcome the stigma of what is happening and what has happened with Trevor Milton?
Well, Michael, they had started to. They were on the path to sort of recovering and getting this stick off of them as much as they could. The Mark Russell, the current CEO, who does have ties to Milton himself. I mean, he comes out of Worthington Industries, which was a partner in one of Milton's previous ventures, his sort of entrepreneurial career before Nikola. But as far as we know at this moment, and anything could change, there's nothing that looks like it's going to affect the company itself. But as you say, it's going to take some time for them. The market is punishing them this morning, but then, the electric vehicle stocks have been getting hammered for months. That's not new. Any recovery gets wiped out. But honestly, it's really hard to say. I think that they are on track to stay with getting the Nikola Tre battery electric out. We'll see what happens, but I think they'll probably be okay, in the near term, but definitely not Trevor Milton.
And so, Alan, I'm really interested to see if you know any of the legal ramifications that this could bring to Milton. Obviously, you have this federal indictment from a grand jury, and then the grand jury is saying that he would be forced to forfeit the up to $1 billion in which he gained from spreading these false accusations and these transactions that came along with that. I asked this to Kevin as well. Does that mean that he would also have to pay back any profits he made from stock that he sold in the last few months? We've covered a lot of those stories where he's pushed out some of those shares and he's still holding on to a good chunk of them, but he has made a significant profit in the last few months from selling these stock shares. Would he have to give that money back as well?
Yeah, I guess I don't know the answer to that, Kaylee. And it's interesting to see the grand jury would talk about remedy, because typically they're the charging group. They're not the ones that would determine what the penalties are. That's something that would fall more to the federal prosecutors than to the grand jury. So that kind of flummoxed me a little bit. I wasn't sure why I was reading that, but I feel like Milton financially, obviously has taken a huge haircut over the months as the stock value has fallen. I mean, at one time, intraday, this was a $93 stock. It's somewhere around $12 this morning, and most of the errors come out of it. I don't think though that we can underestimate the impact of the Hindenburg report here, because as I said, the feds look like they just read it and rewrote it in terms of charging Milton. Obviously, they've done investigation. They've subpoenaed the folks at Nikola. Nikola itself has spent over $30 million defending Milton, of all people, because that was part of their arrangement. But seriously, there's a lot of unknowns here at this point. I'm not going to predict what's going to happen with Nikola itself. My sense is that they'll be okay. Yes, they're smeared in this, but he was there. He was their founder. He was their hype meister, if you will. But really, I think the business itself seems to be on pretty good footing at this point. Expect them to go to the markets for more money soon. They've said they'll do that. They might need $1.5 billion to keep going as far as building out the hydrogen network that they want to do. But they have made a number of announcements in that space, and they do seem to be on track. I did get a chance to, ride in that Nikola Tre truck a few months ago. They do seem to be on track to be producing that. They've moved into the plant in Coolidge, Arizona. So they've been making some positive moves, but this is obviously something that was lurking in the background and has now landed.
Alan, what lesson does this teach the rest of the hydrogen, the EV, the AV space when it comes to making promises that you can't necessarily deliver on? As Kendrick Lamar says, sit down, be humble. Does this kind of give them a warning that says, hey, okay, maybe don't talk about these things unless you can do it. Don't talk about it, be about it, show us the action, and show us what you're doing through what you're producing instead of giving these promises that you can't perform on.
Yeah, you ask and answered it, Kaylee, to be honest with you. Humility is everything, right? And I think there's a much more humble attitude at Nikola these days. They're not talking, they don't hype, they just sort of try to put points on the board. Others, you've got some others out there. Canoe is one. There's been some others that have had changes in their leadership because maybe they got out over their skis on some things that they shouldn't have. But honestly, I think the lesson here, as you say, is humility. Operate humbly, and you'll probably be better off. But remember too that this is the way Trevor Milton has always done business. He's a master showman. He's all about the sizzle, right? And the fact that, much of what he talked about just didn't bear out to be true. And even Nikola did its own investigation and found that he had made some false statements along the way. So, they maybe stuck with him a little longer than they should have. It's interesting back at the time that the merger with Steve Gursky's Vecto IQ was announced, they moved Trevor out of the CEO role and pushed him upstairs to executive chairman. And the reason for that was because he is not an operations guy. He's a sales guy. He's somebody who has vision, but is not somebody that you should necessarily count on to run the business. You've got the same thing going on really at Lordstown Motors right now, where they push Steve Burns out. He's another guy who's all about the hype, right? And, making promises. Obviously, the feds are now looking at him as well. So, you might see a repeat of this coming down the line at Lordstown Motors. But I guess the best thing to say here is do what you say you're going to do, and then, let the market decide.
Absolutely, Alan. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Of course, we'll stick to this coverage as more things come down the line from this story. And we'll talk to you probably tomorrow to get a little bit more of a gauge on this when it comes to Truck Talk. Have a good rest of your Thursday, and we'll see you later, Alan.
All right. Thank you, Kaylee.